And what they've done to the food supply, I think, has been the most consequential conspiracy of the past 60 years in terms of its effect on human life. You go into America in any Walmart and you'll see the degradation of the food supply in the bodies of these people. So I do take this personally. I did not want to pick this fight. I did not see this as an issue. I was a very mainstream journalist before I wrote this book. I was on MSNBC, Fox News. I wrote for the New York Times at times, and I was all over I was the mainstream news guy. This book has made me a heretic among my former colleagues. I published with almost every major publishing house, Simon & Schuster, HarperCollins. I knew nobody would pick this book up. I knew I'd have to go to SAFE, and I appreciate his access to start his own publishing house because it's not like the tie-ins of the food industry manipulating our food supply. It's complicated. It's not an easy, it's like you go on Fox News, they give you 2 minutes and 30 seconds to do a hit.
Yeah, right? It's ridiculous. Yeah.
It's absurd. There's no room for talk. That's why I appreciate the podcast venue because, we have time to actually ferret through this stuff. But, people talk about, it's just, who gives a shit about what the government says about food? Well, the government food guidelines become law in every public school in America. So when I was growing up in the public school district, my lunches every day were full of seed oils, these gross manipulations of nature to fry our food. They replaced lard to fry our chicken nuggets. They got rid of whole fats. They're getting rid of meat, and they're infusing all the food with sugar. So by the time I came out of high school, I was already metabolically compromised. And it's getting worse. So at least there was some meat back then. But you look at a place like New York right now, they're eliminating meat out of entire curricula for school.
Matthew Lysiak, how are you doing, man?
Great. Thanks so much for having me, Keyvan. I appreciate it. It's an honor.
All right. Look, I actually met Safeda Namus on a Bitcoin conference several weeks ago in Slovenia, Maribor or something. He was, signing books and
dude, he's everywhere. He's
everywhere. Like, yeah.
I'm convinced there's 6 Safeda Namuses.
Yeah, no, Safeda is like amazing. I mean, he like totally like, not only orange pilled me, he like, for not only for me, but for so many people. I've heard it for these stories from so many people. Probably, I don't know what, I read, the what do you call it, the pre-word or the prelude to the book and, about yourself and how you got to awesome economics. I think it was even like 2007. I mean, independently of Safeda, right?
Right.
And yeah, so it totally like changed it was a paradigm shift in my thinking. And for the first time, like, what is money? The history of money, why Bitcoin, the whole 3/4 of a book was just all about the history of money. What is money is it just totally, it changed, I think, a lot of people's lives. But your book, by the way, can you see that? Oh no, it's because of the avatar in the background, Fiat Food. So everybody, now I'm going to put it in the show notes. Fiat Food, why inflation destroyed our health and how Bitcoin fixes it, with a, I think, forward and epilogue. Can you say that by Safeda, right?
That's correct. Yeah. Safety contributed a few chapters to the book that were very insightful.
So I'm going to shut up, Matthew. I just want to know a little bit, because I know you're an investigative journalist. Is that your primary profession, or because you do like all kinds of?
Yeah, man. I'm not an economist. I'm not a nutritionist. I'm an investigative journalist, and I worked for 10 years at the New York Daily News, which at the time was the 5th biggest paper in America. And my job was I was a national reporter. So anytime breaking news hit across the country, I would parachute in, I'd do the next flight, I'd spend a few weeks there. And I loved my job. I also dealt a lot with government corruption. And I became quite skilled, I'd say, at digging up data and getting good FOIA requests. Those are Freedom of Information requests of the government, to try to go to the core issue of whatever crime was occurred. Like my job was generally when it came to crime, trying to find motive. And like a lot of people during COVID, I was changed a bit because the scale of corruption I saw in our country exceeded anything I'd ever been a part of. I'd been exposed to Saifedean Ammous through his book, The Bitcoin Standard, which was fantastic. But he wrote a book called The Fiat Standard, which I found really interesting. And there was a short chapter in there called Fiat Food. And I read this and I'm like, dude, I love Saif. I actually think he's I think that we overused the word genius today. Saif is a genius. But this chapter seemed completely nuts. It was this short little excerpt on how the food system's been manipulated and hijacked, and how we've all been living in like a 55-year gaslighting campaign. And I know Saif is an economist, not an investigative journalist. So I was just sort of like blown away by this part. But I began fact checking it. And what I realized was Saif had significantly understated his claims. So I reached out to him and I wanted to write an entire book on this and really dive deeply into how our food supply became corrupted, and really outline the ties to money and how that was really the source of this obfuscation. And he was 100% on board. So he started a publishing house called the Safe House, and I was his first author. And out came Fiat Food.
That's amazing. I mean, our background, our lives are totally different, but it's just interesting our sort of parallels we have. You have 4 daughters. We have 1 daughter. You have 2 dogs. I have 1 dog. And of course, you're an investigative journalist into crime, and my actual background is legal. I studied law, but then I didn't become a lawyer. I just wasn't motivated. I did my, clerkship at the court, and then I started my PhD. But the topic that I selected, it was just at the right time where for the first time, the internal documents, testimonies, whistleblowers, insiders came out. That was like 1999, but I actually started my dissertation or thesis or whatever, PhD, 2001, 2002. And that's where the first time, like huge millions and millions of, internal documents came to the surface, publicly accessible. And I had contacts on the whistleblowers, insiders in the United States, in Germany, Europe. So I traveled around. I research a lot, and that's why I saw, we have a lot of in common, from the research, but from my perspective was like the legal perspective, liability, the product liability of the tobacco industry, or actually should be more concrete, cigarette producers, and sum it up. It's just the whole systemic scientific fraud, corruption, manipulation, the co-opting of media, actually the buying of media, of doctors, journalists. It was so mind-boggling, and it got to a point where I don't want to talk about this right now, but where it got a little bit risky for me because they somewhat indirectly threatened me, right? So I didn't want to talk about this for a long time, but then I thought, okay, what? I'm just going to publish it, put it on a bookshelf. It's just going to it's going to dust away, and then I never touched it again because it's a little bit sensitive, this whole topic, because it's not only a taboo topic, but and when you get into the real details of how they have been manipulating cigarettes with addictive enhancing technologies, at least 52 or 53 parameters that they have used for at least 50, if not even 60, 70 years, and everything. So and that and then when you talk about like the junk food industry or the food industry. And how the tobacco industry, actually cigarette corporations, have bought off, the big, like, I don't know, Nabisco or something like that, like all the other like big conglomerates, and applied the same tactics, and used the same, huge PR agencies like Hilton Knowlton, or the same, lawyer associations or law offices. So I don't know. Do you want to talk about this, like the background of your research? And I mean, you talked about like the freedom of information requests. and all the research that you've done, do you see like parallels between the toxic food industry or junk food industry or the agricultural industry and the the strategies and tactics applied by the cigarette corporations for for the last 60, 70, 80 years or something?
Yeah, the parallels are pretty extreme, I think, because at the heart of it is a real psyop. It's a real marketing campaign from the highest levers of power in America to manipulate our thoughts, to think a certain way, to have a belief. In terms of food, up until really the early 1900s, Americans ate natural food. They just ate real food. That was a thing. And you see a slight switch occurring in the first few decades of the 20th century when Procter and Gamble, which creates cotton seeds, which funded or lubricated the oil for the Industrial Revolution, lubricated the machinery. When suddenly that ended and they had all this cottonseed waste, and they tried to convince people very successfully to eat cotton seeds instead of the lard and the suet and the animal fats that our grandparents have had for generations. And they convinced them. This was kind of a turning point in my research where I saw how marketing attempted to convince our country to eat a non-food. And this was new. Up until then, we ate food. That was a switch. And same with oleomargarine. These non-foods that became pushed by the government then to lower prices. But still, and this is kind of something that's been bothering me a lot lately as this subject has become a national topic. People are now recognizing that our food system is corrupted. And they're immediately going to corporate corruption as the source, as the core reason. And I get it. The corporations are not the good guys in this story. But I'd like your audience to understand that the corporation's motive to make profits was existing between 1900 and 1970. Yet still, in 1970, the average American ate 155 pounds of red meat a year. They ate meat for breakfast. They ate meat for lunch. They ate meat for dinner. But something happened in 1971 on August 15th when President Richard Nixon gave a speech known as the Nixon shock, where he completely decoupled from gold. And what happened was it set loose the degradation of our currency through monetary inflation. And when you go back and look at the data from our leaders back then, they were very aware that food prices were going to soar. And this was a political liability for them, because throughout history, you'll see that people will tolerate endless war. People will tolerate corruption. When food prices go too high, political instability always ensues. And I'll point to 2023 American University documented 12,500 riots, food-related riots. And that same year in Sri Lanka, I think in 2022 in Sri Lanka, rising food and energy prices caused the people to storm the palace, and they had to escape on helicopters. So they're very aware of this link between monetary inflation, rising food prices, and political instability. So you see this real active movement in 1971 to lower the price for the food supply. And you can't do this if you're feeding your people meat. So what happened was this switch where they began pushing these mass-produced grains. Nixon had he appointed a guy named Orville Butts to be the head of the Department of Agriculture to consolidate the food supply. And he wanted corn planted from row to row. And his slogan was, get big or go home. So they began consolidating and weeding out small independent farmers and trying to grow massive amounts of grains. And they were very successful. Then they began pushing through fiat dollars, now that they're unattached to gold, all these subsidies to soy, corn, sugar through a roundabout way. And 55 years later, what you see is, yes, our food is cheap. Our food is abundant. I have 4 daughters. I can feed them all with 3 boxes of cereal, maybe 4 boxes of cereal, and that's pretty cheap. But the nutrients we need to thrive as humans has become remarkably cost prohibitive. So if you're wanting red meat, you're really going to have to pay for it, and because you can't scale at beef. You can't, like with Doritos, you can print them like you can print fiat dollars. They just keep coming. So we're in a really scary time right now where I feel like the food that is necessary for people to thrive has become kind of the upper classes. In America, the lower classes are nutritionally depleted, and where in the past obesity was a sign of affluence, of abundance, today it's a sign of poverty, not just of finances, but more importantly of nutrients, because the people who are overweight now aren't getting the nutrients they need. That's why they continuously eat. And it's all like unnecessary, but it was also intentional. And that's what your audience should understand. They didn't intend on making people sick. That was just a consequence. But the switch of our food supply from 1971 was extremely intentional. It wasn't by accident. And it was colluded. There was a collusion between these corporations because they're just following the incentives. Okay, so they didn't want, they're beholden not to the health of the American public, but to their shareholders. That's the way it works. And once all the subsidies and American system of food health, so we have these in America, we have these government agencies to tell us what to eat, which is unheard of because people have been pretty okay with figuring out what to eat. Like we knew not to eat oil
And
in
these
the 80s.
fraudulent pyramids, can you just, I mean, I don't know, do you want to talk about it later? This whole, I mean, fraudulent pyramid system of the, food.
It's people should understand that it's definitely not science. It's marketing. It's PR. I'll give your audience an example that really disturbed me and kind of brings it all together. January of 2023, the Tufts Food Compass comes out. I think about these people a lot because these are people who are the experts in the world in nutrition, and they spend their majority of their lives studying nutrition. And these complete morons established that Lucky Charms and Fruit Loops were healthier than red meat and whole milk and eggs. This comes out January of 2023. The same week that the Tufts Food Compass comes out, there is this atrocious human being named Dr. Fatima Stanford who appears on an episode of 60 Minutes. And she's a doctor and she has her white coat on and she begins telling the audience that we had for long thought that obesity was due to lifestyle choices, but she's now discovered that it isn't. Individuals have nothing to do with whether they're obese or not. It's genetic. It's a genetic brain disease. They didn't mention in the show that she was paid hundreds of thousands of dollars with the only other expert to appear, Dr. Carolyn Aprofi. Both were lobbyists for Ozempic. The show is sponsored by Ozempic.
God.
And I can't think of anything more vile than trying to tell somebody that they're not in control of what I say is one of the most vital components of being a human, which is your own health. But we're supposed to outsource that to these credentialed experts. So they're saying, no, you're not in control of your health. You're not in control of obesity. Go to this once a month injection that you may or may not need for the rest of your life, Ozempic. This comes right after the Tufts Food Pyramid comes out, which says, eat Lucky Charms, don't eat red meat. Later that same exact month, the American Pediatric Association comes out and says, for the first time in 15 years, they're changing the standard of care for adolescents. And now children as young as 15 should be on weight loss drugs. So I looked for like the smoking gun of how they all colluded and I couldn't find one, to be honest. But I'd be naive to think this was all just a coincidence in the same month. Oh, by the way, the Tufts Food Compass, it's funded. The lead scientist is a guy named Darush Mosafarian. He is significantly funded by industry. The whole Food Compass is funded by the same cereals which ranked ahead of natural foods. So we have our nutrition leaders literally telling us to eat the same foods that make us sick And then we have the pharmaceutical companies coming in telling us it's not their fault, that they have a drug for that. And it's just this cycle that diminishes the human lifespan, but marginalizes it to the extent that they can profit off of it. And it's absolutely fucking disgusting. And it nothing makes me angrier than watching these pretentious people pretending to say science, pretending to speak in the name of science. But what they're really doing is gaslighting people into giving up their self-autonomy.
Yeah, you've
I'm
done.
sorry, I'm getting a little like, I
Yeah,
know,
yeah,
I don't know.
it's great.
Sorry to swear.
You've done incredible work, Matthew, because with your book, because when when I and my co-author Renate Burger is her name, we published a book on, it's a totally nonfiction, investigative book, like totally like hardcore facts, and the feedback that we got from the readers is, we were like no name, authors, but it got, pretty sold out, the whole, first edition, like I think 3,000 books. But the feedback was interesting. I said, you know what, even though, because you didn't, as like in your book, you don't have to like to read the book from beginning to end. You could actually go to any chapter, right, and get a glimpse or a comprehensive understanding what's going on. So we authored this book in a way that, you don't have to read the whole book. You can just pick out a chapter about whatever, passive smoking, environmental tobacco smoke, addictive enhancing technologies, manipulation, or the marketing to kids like down to 3 years old with Joe Camel or something like that. So anyway, but the feedback was interesting because the people were said, you know what, it made me angry. And I think that's the first thing that the emotional, reach is so important and underrated, especially also with your book, Fiat Food, is that it's like hardcore facts, like hardcore data, hardcore facts, hardcore like connecting the dots, super investigative. But what it does emotionally, and that's what we need more of this, not only books, but like documentaries, movies, whatever it is, it reaches people on an emotional level. It makes them angry and it makes them consciously, especially, when you're whatever, whether you're like in our case, like whether you're, passive smoker or active, sick, addictive smokers, or you're junk food eater, like, when you read like the prehistory of Safed and Amuz, I loved it, where he explains how he now nourishes or, feeds his children, only like only meat and bone marrow soup. and what was I going to say? I don't know. I lost my thread, but exactly. I wanted to ask you about the doctors, because I was shocked to find out. I mean, I don't know who was it, maybe even Safed and Amuz, or somebody told me like, medical students or doctors, they get like what, 1, 2, 3 hours, like education, like on nutrition in their medical studies. I mean, what's your take on that? Is that true or?
Dude, yeah, of course. Doctors aren't being taught to treat root causes. They've become, through no fault of their own, through the manipulation of the education system, pharma bots. So what they do is they basically look at your symptoms and they try to come up with a pharmaceutical to deal with that specific symptom. And look, man, like you should be pissed off. Like people should be angry about this because these are human lives. These aren't just groups of atoms. Like we're human beings with souls, I believe. And what they've done to the food supply, I think, has been the most consequential conspiracy of the past 60 years in terms of its effect on human life. You go into America in any Walmart and you'll see the degradation of the food supply in the bodies of these people. So I do take this personally. I did not want to pick this fight. I did not see this as an issue. I was a very mainstream journalist before I wrote this book. I was on MSNBC, Fox News. I wrote for the New York Times at times, and I was all over I was the mainstream news guy. This book has made me a heretic among my former colleagues.
Really?
And of course.
What's their kind of response, or what I mean?
Well, just it's loony. It's a little bit crazy. What happened to Lysiak, people say. Like, he used to be a normal journalist. I published with almost every major publishing house, Simon & Schuster, HarperCollins. I knew nobody would pick this book up. I knew I'd have to go to SAFE, and I appreciate his access to start his own publishing house because It's not like the tie-ins of the food industry manipulating our food supply. It's complicated. It's not an easy. It's like you go on Fox News, they give you 2 minutes and 30 seconds to do a hit,
Yeah, it's
right? You have to
ridiculous.
like
Yeah.
it's absurd. There's no room for talk. That's why I appreciate the podcast venue, because we have time to actually ferret through this stuff. But people talk about, oh, it's just who gives a shit about what the government says about food? Well, the government food guidelines become law in every public school in America. So when I was growing up in a public school district, my lunches every day were full of seed oils, these gross manipulations of nature to fry our food. They replaced lard to fry our chicken nuggets. They got rid of whole fats. They're getting rid of meat, and they're infusing all the food with sugar. So by the time I came out of high school, I was already metabolically compromised. And it's getting worse. So at least there was some meat back then, but you look at a place like New York right now, they're eliminating meat out of entire curricula for schools. Like there was Meatless Monday, and they're expanding that. And I can't help but think about, you think about like the Wright brothers or these really brave people in the past. Would they've been able to come up with these inventions
Exactly.
on a
Yeah.
diet of Lucky Charms cereal bars with their fat, flabby bodies, right? I wonder how many societal gifts we're missing, and it does make me angry. In addition to just the lack of lifespan, I don't know. You should go to Come to America and watch a kid's soccer game right now. It's really sad. You see a bunch of overweight kids wheezing as they're trying to run down the field. It's not their fault. It's not their fault. Like, I'm not trying to make fun of any of them. Like, I was a fat kid. I was raised like that too. We're all being manipulated, and it needs to end. It needs to come
Yeah.
to an end immediately.
Yeah, I mean, taking out the meat out of the, I mean, especially for growing up children or like our daughter. I mean, you go to kindergarten, they have this huge sign or whatever, billboard or whatever. There's a poster with the pyramid thing. Like the meat is like on the lower level, on the lowest level, and the food they get like for lunch is like maybe once a week they get a little bit of meat, but that's but everything is like vegetarian. And now the thing is, now I used to be vegan because of all this brainwashing, indoctrination, propaganda, manipulation.
I was too.
Oh my God, you are vegan? Are you kidding me?
Vegetarian for about a year and a half.
Oh my God! So I went like from.
I didn't know. I didn't know. I felt awful.
Yeah. And I had the results. I had I broke my bone, and I had bone density results before and after, thankfully. And the only reason, I mean, because they told me I had an under average bone density. And I was vegan for 6 or 7 years, from all eater to vegan from one day to another. That was not good at all. I mean, maybe I felt light and maybe a little bit fit, in a way. I went to Paraguay, for example, and ate all day long mangoes, and it's great. I'm not saying fruits and salad and everything. This is great, but if you don't take in all this, comprehend, what do you call it, holistic nutrients, it just has, totally irresponsible, severe effects on your overall health and bone density and everything else, on your organs and your brain and your emotions and your psychology. So what's your experience with that?
So look, man, I'm about 95% carnivore, so I basically only eat meat products and animal products. I play a lot of basketball with people much younger and fitter than me, so my weight went down too much, and that became an issue. So I began integrating. I don't want to be in ketosis for too long. I know some people really like that, but for me, my weight goes down. Maybe I'm doing something wrong. So I've incorporated raw milk, and I drink a lot of raw milk, and it keeps my weight up, and I feel good. But more important than even feeling physically well is that mentally my clarity is significantly better. So as a writer, I'm on my next book already. And for instance, I just have to, even when I'm moving notes from my notepad to my computer, I can remember significantly more when I'm just looking over it. It's noticeable.
Yeah.
So my experience with carnivore has been great. And I don't think carnivore in and of itself is necessarily the only way to go. For me, it eliminates, I can't moderate sugar. Okay. So if I even have fruit, I begin having cravings for sugar. And then instead of thinking about my book and my ideas that I want to get out there, I'm thinking about, how am I going to get a donut? It's addictive. So I just stay away from it. And also, it's like the food supply is different, not just in how it's been manipulated from the government to get us to eat cheaper food to hide the consequences of their inflationary theft of the public, but there's a lot of chemicals in America that even in Europe aren't there. And so just to know what fruits and vegetables to eat, if you look at like what an apple looked like 150 years ago, why did it look completely different? Something's wrong. I'm just going to avoid it. And I feel better that way.
Yeah. And you had many more, like what do you call it, like types, or what do you call it, species, or what do you call it, like brand, like tomatoes, like thousands of different kinds of tomatoes, right? So you had access to a lot of other, what do you call it, organic, permaculture, biodynamic. And this is what I want to talk to you about. Like there are some things that, to be honest with you, we're very concerned about. It's everywhere. It's glyphosate. I mean, now the one thing is like the total reduction, or what do you call it, reduction of the nutrients because of the mass fertilization, what do you call it, fertilizers, the way everything is being grown, and the soil is like totally destroyed. And so I guess like organic, whatever we call it, like natural biodynamic permaculture, growing, it's just maybe niche things, maybe in some local regional areas, but do you think that's because glyphosate is like everywhere? There are some toxins, highly, neurotoxins, whatever that is, for organs, that you think it's too late? I mean, because it's everywhere.
I don't think it's too late, but I think you bring up a great point. And I don't want to speak too much on the fertilizers just because that wasn't really the subject of my research. But I personally believe that, I stay away from glyphosate. It's a tragedy. And I try to keep my kids away from it. But it's hard because we're the weird parents now. It's like there's a birthday party at the kid's school, it seems like every week. And the kids are like little drug addicts after they eat. Like I can't do that anymore. So we bring extra treats that they can just eat. And it's kind of a mess. But because society's normalized eating toxic waste and introducing that into our food supply, that even though the way I eat really has been the way people have eaten for thousands of years, currently, because of the change in the last 50, it's looked at like a fad, which is the most interesting kind of psyop of all, right? Like we're convinced that it's normal to eat margarine on our glyphosate toast with a cinnamon toast crunch bar and low-fat milk while virtue signaling eating like chicken and taking the skin off, like we're 14th century peasants or something. And meanwhile, for thousands of years, as humans have evolved, they've relied almost exclusively on meat. And when they couldn't find, like sometimes you'd find berries in the Northeast for a few months out of the year if a bear didn't get them. But nobody was eating strawberries in Arizona in December. I mean, it was rare. The crux of our food supply has always been meat. It wasn't a meal unless there was meat. And the switch has been unbelievable, where if I go to a restaurant and I order a steak, this has happened to me. People like be concerned about my health and voice that. Where if I just drink a bunch of Mountain Dew Code Red, nobody would say a word.
Oh my God. This is mind blowing. Now, do you think you talked about the feedback that you got, or the sort of the verbal attacks you got from your colleagues? I mean, do they believe in this, in their own shit? I mean, is that like so super are they just scared to talk about it, or is it like, ooh, that's taboo? I mean, what's the motivation behind that?
I think it's different motivations for different reporters. I can still consider a lot of these people my friends in the industry. A lot of them are still at the New York Times and the New York Post and the New York Daily News. But I was in that, and you really, corporate media right now, you really have to have a shared belief system. You cannot go off the reservation. If you do, you're exiled. And that's kind of happened to me. I mean, every time I've had a book release, I'm on, I've done the Good Morning America and these morning shows and the cable news shows. I didn't even try, in all honesty, to get on. I knew they're not going to have me talk about their corporate sponsors, right? Like, of course. So I understand, and I understood this when I decided to write this book. I actually didn't think it would do very well. I wanted to write it for my kids to really explain to them what happened and how to arm themselves intellectually against the psyop that we're experiencing, this gaslighting campaign. And I'm actually just shocked at the response this book has gotten. This being translated now into 8 different languages.
Wow! Congratulations! Wow, that's amazing.
It's a testament to podcasts like yours and this alternate media.
That's the only way to go. Yeah. Nostr podcasts. What would we do? What would we seriously do without the internet in general, of course? But now, I mean, you have.
My best-selling book.
But the thing is, you see,
I have no major publishing house.
Yeah, yeah. The thing is, people are so over. It's just I don't know. They're in such a hamster wheel. They don't have, especially people who work, 9 to 5. Let's say they have children, they have responsibilities, they have obligations. It just. And it's so on top of that, the irresponsible, propaganda that's been spewing out of the mainstream media. You can't just rely on mainstream media. I mean, the only way you can is that if you have a little bit of time and energy and attention span, you go and listen to whatever. Would it be Joe Rogan or Safira Namus or whatever independent podcasts and Substack or people who write articles? That's the only way to go, right?
And dude, it's a great time to be alive today because this book, written 10 years ago, nobody would have read it. But because of the dynamic shifts in media, and as somebody who's been in media my whole life, I'm blown away by the power of what's happened. Because in the 90s, you had the internet come out. But before the 90s, it was in America, there was like 5 basic power brokers that controlled and served as gatekeepers for all the information that came to the public. And then a man named Matt Drudge broke that. He had a website called the Drudge Report, and Newsweek had a story on the president. They were going to spike it. They weren't going to report it. Drudge was the first internet reporter, and he started this revolution. No longer after Matt Drudge broke the Monica Lewinsky story did editors have that ability. But then you saw, after Trump got elected, you saw the pullback. And instead of 5 major TV networks and New York Times, who controlled as gatekeepers, you began seeing ideas and thoughts in these kind of internet ghettos of Twitter, Google, Facebook, and then they began censoring and kind of reining information back. Elon Musk changed that with the purchase of Twitter, and Joe Rogan changed that by giving birth, like Rush Limbaugh did in the 80s, to what Rush Limbaugh in the 80s decentralized radio. Decentralized information through talk radio. Rogan did that through podcasting. And I'm like so optimistic now that we can have these sort of conversations that wouldn't have been able to happen just a short time ago. And it's because of these revolutions. I'm also a little skeptical and scared that there's going to be another pullback. Hopefully not. We have a good administration that seems to embrace freedom right now. Hopefully they keep that up.
Yeah. Yeah, the only way to go is really, let's talk about solutions. Would it be access to food? There's like, what are these Bitcoin is called? I think the Texas, whatever, the regional, local, they have, organic cows and organic meat, and whether it be United States or Europe, I think this is from a solution perspective is like, going back to the roots, supporting regional, local, shops or farmers, or that's what we do. We try to support. Even though maybe it might cost a few euros or dollars more, but that's the only way to go, right? How do you see, like, on different levels, the solution? Like, would it be? Yeah,
Keyvan, this is where I'm going to lose half your audience right now. They're going to
go ahead.
So I'm going to warn you, because it's going to sound insane. Buy Bitcoin. And the reason buying Bitcoin solves this problem isn't inherently because of what Bitcoin is in and of itself, but because it destroys the Federal Reserve. So every time you buy Bitcoin with your fiat dollars, you're hurting the Federal Reserve. And if you remove the Federal Reserve from this equation and you go back to a policy where we have hard currency, you have no inflation, or a very minor inflation. So even if you went to gold, Bitcoin's much better, and we could get into that, but gold always gets centralized and stolen by the government. But gold goes up at 2.5% in supply. Bitcoin goes up significantly less. And what you do when you buy Bitcoin, you're taking a jab at the Federal Reserve, and you're ending its incentive to obfuscate the degradation of the currency and the consequences in the food supply. So they have no reason to try to change the food supply to hide inflation when there's no inflation. Bitcoin and the Federal Reserve, and I know some Bitcoiners argue over this, I can't understand it, they're incompatible. Like, they cannot coexist.
Yeah.
And, you know, that's a very real threat to these people. So what we're going to see in the next coming years is an acceleration of the PSYOP. We already saw it a few weeks ago when they released the new nutritional guidelines, which told us to even eat less meat and more mass-produced grains. It's going to increase, and the threat's going to be, oh, you're changing the temperature by eating meat of the earth. Or
oh my God, the next fraud, the next scientific fraud, CO2. Oh my God, yeah.
So yeah, buy Bitcoin, destroy the Fed, end the gaslighting campaign, because they're not doing this just for fun. They're not trying to hurt us, honestly. At least I don't think they are. They're just trying to maintain their power and hide the effects of monetary inflation. Bitcoin ends any need to do that because it's a hard currency and there is no inflation. So they're not just going to be gaslighting us for their own fun. No, they're following the incentive. And then you end all these subsidies going to the corn, soy, and sugar market. We're like, why the hell, Keyvan, are we putting corn on our pancakes? Why do we have corn in our Coke? It's insanity. This high fructose corn syrup. I live 18 miles from the Mexican border. I go over there, and there's cane sugar in their Coke. Like, that's not healthy, but it's a lot better.
Yeah.
We've corrupted our food supply to such an extent, and Bitcoin would end it. And I know that sounds wacky, but I think the most charitable act any of your audience members can make is to take their shitty fiat and to buy Bitcoin with it.
Yeah.
Because it ends the PSYOP not just in nutrition, but in all realms of fiat world, where we have this bizarro world of incentives.
Yeah, I mean, it's you're actually making an understatement. You know, I mean, I know if we would talk like for hours, you would probably go much deeper, much more. But I know, you know, people, especially beginners who haven't even heard of Bitcoin, I think that's the best approach. You know, just buy Bitcoin and you will just deroot the fiat system. But you know, we do, you know, with our cooperation partners at Bitcoin 21, this is what we do. We do presentations, we deliver information, we give them like comprehensive, like the bigger picture, you know, what is money, why Bitcoin, what are the root causes, what are the solutions, what are the symptoms in between. And it, you know, and then if you really want to go further, it's like, what is the real potential? What will Bitcoin really achieve is like, you know, if we listen to Jeff Booth at Safed and Amuse, you know, they always tell you it's a deflationary money with absolute scarcity, and it will transform everything on every fucking level. You know, will it be socially, technologically, psychologically? People will have more time, will, you know, do what their calling is, you know, do whatever work that is, you know. So this is a totally new civilization that we can, but, you know, it's just a little bit too much for people because they can't even comprehend, let alone imagine what the future is literally in our hands, right? And you probably need a critical mass of 3, 4, 5% of the Earth's population, and the sheep will, I'm sorry to say, but, you know, most of humanity is just a sheep attitude, a sheep mentality. They will just follow for their own good, you know, they will thank themselves, but eventually I guess it's up to us, to the critical mass. We have to start it, we have to adopt, and we have to try, you know, to get as many people as possible into the Bitcoin boat. and then it will just, as you can see already on so many levels, it's being adopted. I mean, I'm not a fan of institutional adoption, but who cares? If the price goes up, that's the first, unfortunately, the first perverted psychological factor. That's where people, it's like, oh, price is going up, now it's getting more interesting. It's so totally perverted. But people cannot just fathom, they cannot even imagine that what kind of civilization we could have on every level. Of course, beginning with nutrition, with health, with education or non-education, or non-propaganda, and finally, we can get the best potential out of our children, and finally bring out the technologies that actually are already existing and being suppressed or compartmentalized for so how many decades. Sorry, I'm going in a rant, but it's a little bit depressing. After so many years, when you're so deep down in the rabbit holes. How do you communicate that? And I think the best way is, again, your book, or maybe transform this into a thriller, a documentary, something that touches people's first on an emotional level, psychological level, and then I think the aha moment will come on a whatever intellectual, cognitive comprehension level. Do you agree with me, or
well, it's really well said. I mean, look, if you took a gold coin in 1900 and buried it for 10 years, you could dig that $10 gold coin up and reasonably expect that you would be able to purchase more. Your purchasing power would have increased because technology advances and things become easier. Yet today, if you were to take a $100 bill and bury it, 10 years later, you're losing about 40% of its value. What fiat does is it siphons the productivity of, since 1943 Bretton Woods, really the entire world, anybody who holds dollars. And it turns your grandmother's advice on its head, who told us to save money. Today, the richest people are the people most in debt. There's a reason for that, because in fiat, if you're not, creating more dollars out of debt, your money is being devalued. Mm-hmm. And, you go back to the roots of fiat, it was to wage war that the public didn't want, because under a gold standard, you couldn't wage war for very long periods of time without the support of the people through the purchase of war bonds. Fiat, you own a $10 bill today, but you don't really own it because there's an unelected third party who can print as much of it as they want. So it's really a hideous theft of the productivity. So people just like to think, oh, it's money. No, it's my time. And that's my life. And you're taking that away from me. And I'm buying Bitcoin not to get rich. I'm preserving my wealth because I want to hand it down to my daughters one day.
Exactly.
And Bitcoin allows me an avenue. And I don't want to get rich. I just want to preserve what I have.
Yeah. And people, say, oh, it's deflation, because we've been so indoctrinated with deflation is bad. No, that when you have money that is, especially with Bitcoin, gold is like, it's lost. Gold has lost its, it just, I mean, it had its function like whatever, 100 years ago or something. But now, we have all the properties that we could ever dreamt of for, especially with the absolute scarcity, decentralization, non-confiscatable, it's, and so on and so on. But the thing that people need to understand is that, as you said, things are going to get cheaper. Everything, product and services is going to get cheaper. We're going to have exponentially more innovation beyond our comprehension or imagination. And yes, we're going to spend. Finally, we're going to have a real monetary value that we can spend. First of all, on best nutrients, nutritious food. Would it be red meat or fish or everything organic, biodynamically grown, or we can do all that, and we can have. I don't know. It's just so much propaganda about this overpopulation. I mean, we could have probably easily 30, 40, 50 billion people on this planet with the right technologies. Would it be an energy technology, everything? But I know it's just a little bit too much for people to absorb. But hey, thanks so much again, Matthew. Where can people find you? Is there anything concluding thoughts you want to say, or?
Man, just thank you. Keep up the great work. You're part of this new wave of decentralized media and decentralized thought and information. And that's where it starts, right? Like, that's the battlefield. And I appreciate you giving me this outlet. Go to the safehouse.com. That's Saif Adina Moose's publishing house, which I'm proud to be an author in. There's also great work by Parker Lewis.
Oh, yeah.
Who wrote,
I love him. Yeah.
He's a
Gradual
great,
suddenly.
there's like a Christmas deal, and Safe has a new book coming out called The Gold Standard, which
Oh
is
yeah,
a book of fiction. It's going to be fantastic. It hypothesizes what the world would have looked like if we
exactly.
stayed under a hard money.
Yeah,
So, dude, exciting times, man. This is
super
a
exciting.
great experience. I appreciate you having me on. Thank you.
Well, my pleasure, my honor. Matthew, it was really an honor. Maybe we can repeat this, I don't know, maybe in 6, 12, 18 months or something. Well, I'll call
Please.
you up. Thank you so much for all your work, and and you're doing amazing work. You're waking up people and giving them the essential vital information and comprehension that they really need, especially for their own good.
Thank you.
All right, Matthew, bye. Thank you so much. Okay, that was Matthew Lysiak, and he's just amazing. So let me just go screen share. This is his book on Amazon. You can also, I would go, of course, you can buy it on Amazon, but just go on Safedan Amuz. Here you got Safedan Amuz on Safe House. Safedan Amuz, as you can see, safedan.com, right? And yeah, and from there you can just find his latest publication, which you can pre-order. The Gold Standard is going to be a thrilling semi-fiction book. That actually, this is exactly what I was trying, was trying to get at with Matthew, is that the potential evolution, the transformational civilization that we could have with Bitcoin, and for this, he hypothesized, what if there would have been a gold standard from the beginning of the 20th century, and central banks would be obsolete. And I got, my book is, you can read it for free. The second edition is for free, updated version, even on infomedian.at for the German-speaking folks. But the quotes or the citations from the internal documents of the tobacco industry or cigarette corporations are inside in original, in German and English. So you can actually just read the quote if you want, and it will give you a bigger picture. And this is what I published several nonfiction books and Smoke Reality for young people, semi-fiction, but this is the most important one, Schwarzbuch Zigarette, or the Smoke Black Book Cigarette, all based and rooted on the once internal documents of the tobacco industry, whistleblowers, insiders, from America. I traveled a lot, did a lot of research. I did this in total for at least 10 or 15 years. Anyway, thank you so much again. My name is Keyvan Davani. I'm the host of the Davani Connection Show, and let me know, if you have any other, favorite guests, of Bitcoiners, whether scientists, engineers, inventors, whistleblowers, insiders that I want to bring on. Give them a shout out, or let me know who it is I should invite. And looking forward to the next conversation. And buy Bitcoin. And get yourself a hardware wallet, get it off of the exchange, and I'll be coming up. There'll be more news coming up to reality near you. All right. Goodbye.